Thank you for watching Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Putnam. I am thankful to all news resources. Following are the news which have been reported by American, European and Canadian channels. African, Asian channels and all news agencies have reported the same news. U.S. Supreme Court ruled that Texas police can arrest illegal immigrants. Differences between Mr. Biden and Netanyahu causing famine in Gaza. Inflation cooling in Canada. Canada's air quality is bad than U.S. Canadian Palestinians in Gaza. Kate goes to shopping. Russians will participate in Olympic Games, but not social media influencer effect on American election this year. Mr. Biden in election campaign. Trump's new controversial remarks about Jews, voters of Democrats. Negotiations to avoid partial shutdown of U.S. government. Former aide of Mr. Trump reported to Miami prison. Police torture in Mississippi. Defense Secretary Mr. Austin pledged support to Ukraine. Security law in Hong Kong for dissenters. Former Brazil president facing indictment. $230 billion profit by forced labor. Electrical vehicle and emission law. On Wall Street, Dow Jones increased, S&P 500 increased, and Nasdaq also increased. Now the news in detail.
Nine of Oz. On the NewsHour tonight, an immigration ruling from the Supreme Court means Texas police can now arrest and deport migrants.
Experts warn of famine in Gaza as a rift opens between Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the Biden White House.
And how influencers on social media are playing an outsized role in this presidential election.
A lot of people are persuaded daily by stuff on TikTok. They'll see a clip of Biden or Trump saying something, and that'll change their minds.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by...
These are people who are trying to change the world. Startups have this energy that energizes me. I'm thriving by helping others every day. People who know BDO.
The ongoing support of these individuals and institutions, and friends of the NewsHour, including Kathy and Paul Anderson, and Camilla and George Smith.
The John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, fostering informed and engaged communities. More at kf.org.
And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. The U.S. Supreme Court has cleared the way for Texas to enforce a controversial immigration law for now. The law allows state officials to arrest and deport migrants suspected of crossing the border illegally.
The three liberal justices dissented, with Justice Sonia Sotomayor warning, quote, "The court gives a green light to a law that will upend the long-standing federal-state balance of power and sow chaos." Challenges to the law are not over as the justices sent the case back to a lower court. NewsHour Supreme Court analyst Marsha Coyle has been following the decision and joins us now. Marsha, it's great to see you. So the Supreme Court will allow Texas to enforce for now this contentious new law that gives local police the authority to arrest migrants. How did the justices arrive at this ruling?
First of all, Jeff, it appears to be a 6-3 decision not to grant the Biden administration a temporary pause on the law taking effect. The only one who wrote in the majority was Justice Barrett, and she was joined by Justice Kavanaugh. And her bottom line seems to be that it is premature for the Supreme Court to act on the administration's request at this time, while the lower federal appellate court, the Fifth Circuit, still had before it the question of whether to pause the law while an appeal goes forward in that Fifth Circuit.
So this law now goes into effect as the litigation continues in the lower courts. What happens next? What are the implications?
Okay, well, first of all, the lower federal appellate court, I believe, has scheduled arguments for the first week in April on whether it should pause the law while an appeal goes forward. But with the law would immediately take effect now, and Texas will begin to implement it. It, as you said, allows law enforcement officials to arrest undocumented immigrants who cross the border illegally, allows them to deport them to Mexico. State judges can make the deportations. It is quite a departure from what federal law has historically given the responsibility to the federal government. Texas, on the other hand, claims that its law mirrors the federal law and that many states cooperate.
That is NewsHour Supreme Court analyst Marsha Coyle. Marsha, thanks as always.
My pleasure, Jeff.
In the day's other headlines, President Biden kicked off a 3-day swing across the West with a focus on winning Latino voters. He stopped first in Reno, Nevada to meet with volunteers before heading to Las Vegas, then to Phoenix, Arizona, and finally to Dallas and Houston in Texas. In the meantime, former President Trump stirred new outrage for saying Jewish voters who support Democrats hate Israel and Judaism. The nation's top Jewish elected official, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, called it, quote, unadulterated anti-Semitism. Both candidates have clinched their presidential nominations, but other races are getting attention tonight in the latest primaries. Republicans in Ohio are picking a candidate to try to pick up a U.S. Senate seat. And in heavily Democratic Chicago, voters are choosing a nominee for the nation's second-largest prosecutor's office. The winner is all but assured of election in November. Congressional negotiators work today to flesh out spending bills needed to avert a partial government shutdown this weekend. They agreed overnight on the overall package, covering the Pentagon, Homeland Security, and other departments. Senate leaders welcomed the deal, but said time is running out.
There's a lot of work to do in the coming days. If both parties proceed in the same manner we did 2 weeks ago, quickly, constructively, and without unnecessary partisan dithering, then I'm hopeful we can finish the appropriations process without causing a lapse in government services.
The spending bills are the final ones needed to fund the government for the rest of the fiscal year. Former Trump trade advisor Peter Navarro reported to federal prison today in Miami. He's to serve 4 months for refusing to cooperate with the congressional January 6th investigation. Navarro condemned the justice system today at a news conference. Then he was driven into the prison complex, and officials confirmed he's now in custody. In Mississippi, 2 former sheriff's deputies were sentenced in the racist torture of 2 black men. One defendant got 20 years in federal prison, the other got more than 17 years. In all, 6 former officers admitted to their roles in sexually and physically abusing the victims. Several belong to a group known as the Goon Squad. The sentencings continue tomorrow and Thursday. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin insisted today that Washington remain committed to Ukraine's war effort despite a funding stalemate in Congress. Austin joined counterparts from Europe and other nations at a meeting in Germany. Later, he said, quote, "The United States will not let Ukraine fail."
I leave here today fully determined to keep U.S. security assistance and ammunition flowing, and that's a matter of survival and sovereignty for Ukraine, and it's a matter of honor and security for America. And make no mistake, Putin is watching, the world is watching, and history is watching.
Last week, the Pentagon sent its first military aid to Ukraine since December after finding cost savings in other accounts. In Hong Kong today, lawmakers unanimously approved a national security law that grants the government even more power to crack down on dissent. The legislature, stacked with pro-China loyalists, had fast-tracked the measure. It expands on a similar law that's been used to prosecute pro-democracy activists since 2020. Former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro is facing the first of what may be multiple indictments, this one for falsifying his COVID vaccination status. The far-right leader had openly flouted health restrictions during the pandemic. Under Brazil's legal system, today's indictment allows actual charges to be filed. The United Nations International Labor Organization reports that illegal profits from forced labor have skyrocketed to $236 billion per year. The agency finds there was a 37% increase in 2021 from a decade earlier. It also found sexual exploitation accounts for 3/4 of the illicit profits. Back in this country, the Biden administration is easing its drive for more electric vehicles. The Energy Department granted higher mileage ratings for EVs today. That makes it easier for automakers to meet higher fuel economy mandates. And reports said the EPA will relax its timetable for tailpipe emission cuts. The plan relies heavily on EV sales, but demand for the vehicles has slowed. And on Wall Street, stocks advanced again today ahead of tomorrow's Federal Reserve announcement on interest rates. The Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 320 points to close at 39,110. The Nasdaq rose 63 points. The S&P 500 added 29. Still to come on the NewsHour, President Biden's plans to counter the spiking cost of housing. What's causing the record-breaking rise in ocean temperatures? Why many Americans from white evangelical backgrounds are choosing to leave the church. And a new exhibit celebrates the impact and legacy of the Harlem Renaissance.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite.
Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Famine is imminent in northern Gaza, according to a UN-backed report published Monday. Michael Fakhri, the UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food, said the U.S. is, quote, complicit in the starvation of the Palestinian people in Gaza, and urged the Biden administration to call for a ceasefire and stop sending weapons and money to Israel. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres and UNRWA Chief Philippe Lazzarini also blasted what they call the man-made hunger crisis Monday. This is EU's top diplomat, Josep Borrell.
This famine is not a natural disaster. It's not a flood. It's not a earthquake. It's entirely man-made. I'm coming from Washington, and I dare to say, well, yes, Israel is provoking famine.
Borrell added, quote, before the war, Gaza was the greatest open-air prison. Today, it's the greatest open-air graveyard, he said. The European Union Monday approved sanctions against violent Israeli settlers in the occupied West Bank and against Hamas. The White House says President Biden told Benjamin Netanyahu Israel should not invade Rafah during a Monday phone call, as the Israeli Prime Minister reportedly agreed to send a team of Israeli officials to Washington to discuss an alternative approach. But the Palestinian Foreign Ministry says Israel has already begun its large-scale attack on Rafah without announcing it, as Israeli forces escalate their bombardment of the once so-called safe zone, where some 1.5 million Palestinians have taken shelter. Earlier today, Israeli strikes killed at least 14 people in Rafah and injured dozens of others.
We're in Ramadan. People have suhoor to prepare for the fast, but we're having suhoor over body remains, blood and martyrs. There's US support, European support, and support of the whole world to Israel. They support them with weapons and planes, with continuing planes. They mock us and send 4 or 5 airdrops just to save face.
Close to 32,000 Palestinians have been killed by Israel since October 7th, according to the latest official numbers. 74,000 others have been injured. The police general tasked with coordinating the entry of aid trucks into northern Gaza was killed by Israeli forces during their raid on the Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza City on Monday. Faik Mabhou recently helped secure the arrival of food aid for 2 nights in a row after weeks of Israeli blockade. Meanwhile, Al Jazeera journalist Ismail Al-Ghul, who was arrested and beaten during the Al-Shifa raid, was released after 12 hours of detention. While in Israeli custody, Al-Ghul said he and other journalists were forced to strip naked, lie on their stomachs for hours in the cold while blindfolded with their hands tied. In the occupied West Bank, Israeli forces arrested journalist Rula Hassanein and raided her home overnight. She has a 9-month-old baby she was forced to leave behind despite still breastfeeding. In related news, a 26-year-old Palestinian Bedouin detained in an Israeli prison died over the weekend amidst reports of rampant abuse and medical neglect in Israeli jails. Juma Abu Ghanima is at least the 13th person to die from mistreatment in an Israeli prison since October 7th. In Haiti, at least a dozen people were killed as armed groups attacked 2 upscale neighborhoods in the capital Port-au-Prince Monday. The communities of La Boule and Thomasin had remained relatively untouched by worsening violence and turmoil in Haiti. Residents described the chaotic scene early Monday.
Last night, around 11 p.m., when we were sitting here, 2 young boys suddenly appeared and opened fire on several of our brothers. They didn't address anyone. They just came out and started shooting. They didn't ask any questions. I was there when the shooting happened, and I saw them get out of a car and start shooting. I was trying to understand the situation.
Last week, unelected Haitian Prime Minister Ariel Henry announced he'll resign after a coalition of armed groups opposing his rule declared an uprising. Meanwhile, Haitian stakeholders and leaders of the Caribbean Community, or CARICOM, are still in negotiations to establish a transitional presidential council in Haiti. In Nigeria, armed groups kidnapped at least 100 people, including children, in 2 separate attacks in Kaduna State in the north. The mass abduction is the latest attack following the separate kidnapping of nearly 300 students and staff from a school in the northwestern town of Kuriga earlier this month. Abductions in Nigeria have become more frequent in recent years as armed groups target residents for large ransoms. In Gambia, the National Assembly voted to repeal a landmark 2015 ban on female genital cutting, also known as female genital mutilation. If approved, it would be the first reversal of protections against the practice, which causes long-term health effects, including increased risks of complications during pregnancy and childbirth. Less than 10% of the National Assembly's members are women. This is Amnesty International researcher Michelle Eken.
It simply will be disastrous for women's rights, not only in Gambia, but in the region. It will tell young girls, your rights can be easily taken away. If this is passed, then what's next? We have to really be strong about it and make sure that we don't take away something that took so long to fight for.
Schools in South Sudan have temporarily shuttered in preparation for a scorching heat wave that's expected to last for the next 2 weeks. Officials have advised children to stay indoors as temperatures are likely to reach 113 degrees Fahrenheit. Extreme heat waves have become more common in South Sudan due to the worsening climate crisis and has compounded an already dire humanitarian crisis due to conflict in the region. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has expressed concerns at reports the Burmese military is continuing to bomb civilian areas. Dozens of people reportedly killed, including children, early Monday in Burmese military airstrikes on a predominantly Rohingya village in Rakhine State. Clashes in the region soared after the end of a ceasefire in November between the Arakan army and Burmese forces that have been in place since 2021 military coup. Guterres said, quote, "The expansion of conflict is driving displacement and exacerbating pre-existing vulnerabilities and discrimination." In Syria, some 30,000 children and women who had ties to Islamic State militants are still being detained in camps and prisons across North Syria under severely abusive conditions. That's according to a UN-backed commission, which says most of the children were brought to the camps a decade ago when the Islamic State controlled portions of land in the region. It's been 5 years since the militant group lost its presence in Syria, but the children have yet to be repatriated to their home countries, remaining in indefinite captivity. Tens of thousands of people, many of them children under the age of 12, and women who are married to Islamic State militants, are being held at Al-Hol camp, which has been described by the UN as a, quote, blight on the conscience of humanity. Dozens of babies are reportedly born each month at Al-Hol, which is located in a region of northwestern Syria still patrolled by hundreds of U.S. troops. Meanwhile, teenage boys are kept in jails that are run by the U.S.-backed Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces. In Argentina, protesters in Buenos Aires were met with riot police and tear gas Monday as they marched in a union-led rally to protest mounting food insecurity and far-right President Javier Milei's massive cuts to social spending. This is union leader Hugo Godoy.
Today we came back to march together to demand the government once again respond to this worsening situation of the food crisis that over 6 million Argentinians suffer from. The government doesn't even have an inch of humanity to guarantee food provisions to soup kitchens. It's as if they enjoyed the people's pain.
The protest took place days after Argentine senators dealt a major blow to President Javier Milei's so-called economic shock therapy agenda, voting to block his sweeping decree. Since taking office, Milei has imposed over 300 austerity and deregulation measures. He also cracked down on the right to protest. Argentina has the highest inflation rate in the world, even as it slowed down to 13% last month, down from 20% in January. UNICEF's warned children are suffering some of the worst effects of the current economic crisis, and Milei's cost-cutting measures with a child poverty rate that could soon hit 70%. Back in the United States, Donald Trump's failed to secure the $454 million bond for his New York civil fraud case, increasing the likelihood New York Attorney General Letitia James will seize his real estate assets. Trump's lawyer said their client was turned down by around 30 bond underwriting companies. The lawyers are requesting the former president be allowed to delay posting bond while he appeals the case. If their request is denied, Letitia James could start seizing Trump's properties on Monday. In other Trump news, former White House aide Peter Navarro is expected to turn himself into a federal prison in Miami today to serve his 4-month sentence for contempt of Congress. Navarro will become the first ever ex-White House official to serve time for a contempt of Congress conviction after he refused to comply with a subpoena from the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th Capitol insurrection. The U.S. Supreme Court Monday heard arguments in 2 First Amendment cases. The National Rifle Association is accusing a New York State official of threatening insurance companies in order to get them to cut ties with the NRA. In another case, conservative states and social media users allege the federal government overstepped when it put pressure on social media companies to moderate misinformation around COVID-19 and the 2020 election. The justices appeared skeptical of efforts to limit the Biden administration's contact with social media companies. This is Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson.
So I guess some might say that the government actually has a duty to take steps to protect the citizens of this country, and you seem to be suggesting that that duty cannot manifest itself in the government encouraging or even pressuring platforms to take down harmful information. So can you help me? Because I'm really worried about that because you've got the First Amendment operating in an environment of threatening circumstances from the government's perspective, and you're saying that the government can't interact with the source of those problems.
And the Environmental Protection Agency announced a total ban on asbestos. The carcinogen had been largely prohibited in previous environmental orders, but chrysotile asbestos had been permitted until this latest ban and is used in a range of products including brake linings, gaskets, and in chlorine bleach and sodium hydroxide production. It's been found to cause lung cancer, mesothelioma, and other cancers, and is linked to over 40,000 U.S. deaths each year. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
Inflation is cooling this Tuesday night. What could help keep consumer prices down and fresh hopes for an interest rate cut?
Which really helped the economy recover.
Smoke and fears, BC's early warning about wildfires, and how Canada's air quality rates worse than the U.S. What happened to Canada's promise to get relatives out of Gaza to Canada?
Death is all around them.
And Kate goes shopping,
which will be nearly 4 months out of the public eye.
Is this glimpse of the princess quelling conspiracy theories?
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. There's a bit of good news about the cost of living in Canada. The rate of inflation dipped last month, and though the cost of big things like rent and mortgages are still high, there are some positive economic signs. Here's a snapshot. Canada's annual rate of inflation slowed to 2.8% in February. That's down slightly from 2.9% in January. It is the first time since early 2021 inflation has been in the Bank of Canada's target range for 2 consecutive months. In our top story, Anne Gaviola looks at what's behind that and what it could mean for interest rates.
All those interest rate hikes have helped cool the economy.
Consumers in Canada have been pulling back their spending on a lot of things, and that lack of demand is not enabling businesses to raise prices as much as they had been in the past.
Reflected in some lower prices in February. New cell phone plans plunged 26%. Clothing and footwear prices were down more than 4%. Airfares tumbled more than 5%. And it was the first month grocery food inflation was below overall inflation since October 2021, coming in at 2.4%. Economists say dampening consumer inflation expectations can help tame future price increases.
I see that grocery prices are not going up as quickly anymore. They see discounts and deals back in store, perhaps keeping control inflation expectations by consumers. And that in turn has helped inflation stay in moderation.
The proverbial thorn in the Bank of Canada's side, shelter costs. Mortgage costs remain stubbornly high, up 26% year over year, and rent inflation continues to soar. The Bank of Canada is widely expected to hold its benchmark interest rate at 5% in April, but with the economy flatlining, a cut by mid-year may be on the table.
A rate cut in June or sooner rather than later would really help the economy recover.
Energy prices may be the wild card. We're about to switch to summer gas, which is more expensive. Supply will also tighten as some refineries go offline for maintenance, while demand picks up with warming weather.
I would expect broadly gas prices to likely continue rising in much of Canada through potentially Victoria Day before we start to see some improvement.
Anne is with me from Toronto, and rent and mortgage interest costs continue to be the main drivers of inflation and, of course, a major expense for most Canadians. Are there any signals about what's coming for those? If you carve out those shelter costs, the Bank of Canada has already met its inflation target. But they're a huge challenge. Soaring demand has juiced rents across the country, and there are no signs that's letting up. And mortgage costs will come down if the central bank cuts interest rates. But as recent polling and history suggest, a clear sign will likely fire up the housing market and boost prices and activity. It is a conundrum. Donna? Interesting, Anne Gaviola in Toronto, thanks. Canadians have begun paying their last respects to former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney. His casket, draped in the Canadian flag, was carried by Mounties into the Sir John A. Macdonald building in Ottawa this morning. It's there that he will lie in state opposite Parliament Hill today and tomorrow. Mackenzie Gray has been speaking to people about why they wanted to pay tribute.
We're here today to honor the brilliant legacy of a great statesman.
We're going to miss him. He made an extraordinary difference for my community, but for the entire country.
Brian Mulroney's family greeting hundreds, including another former resident of 24 Sussex who served in Mulroney's cabinet. Joe Clark, Mulroney's external affairs minister, was central in their fight against apartheid in South Africa.
When you think back on it, for anyone to win two majority governments is remarkable. But then to have applied that capacity to so transform the country is really a tribute to his stamina.
But it wasn't just VIPs. A steady stream of Canadians came to remember the 18th Prime Minister.
I'm an immigrant to this country, and it is those forebears who have provided opportunities for people like us to be here.
The first person in line, one of Mulroney's former RCMP security officers.
I was strictly there to provide security, not to advise him in any way in his politics. Not necessarily in favor of a lot of what he did, but also in favor of some of the stuff he did.
Obviously, I didn't always succeed.
Mulroney did leave office deeply unpopular, and it was years before the Conservative Party recovered. Despite 13 years of Liberal rule after Mulroney, former Conservative leader Aaron O'Toole praised the former Prime Minister for making tough decisions on GST and free trade.
The economy we have today really was set in motion almost 40 years ago by Brian Mulroney.
Mulroney will continue to lie in state here in Ottawa tomorrow, in advance of his casket going to Montreal, Donna, before a state funeral on Saturday.
All right, Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa, thanks. There's a dire projection of what's coming in Gaza. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights says Israeli restrictions on the entry of aid may amount to starvation as a method of war, which is a war crime. And the U.S. Secretary of State said today no other place in the world is suffering the way Gaza is, where 2 million people don't have enough to eat.
100% of the population in Gaza is at severe levels of acute food insecurity. That's the first time an entire population has been so classified.
Acute food insecurity is when a person's inability to find adequate food puts their life or livelihood in immediate danger. It is the strongest statement yet from the U.S. on the scale of the crisis.
100%, the totality of the population, is in need of humanitarian assistance. Compare that to Sudan, about 80% of the population there is in need of humanitarian assistance. Afghanistan, about 70%. So again, this only underscores both the urgency, the imperative of making this the priority.
It's been more than 2 months since Canada's government launched a temporary visa program allowing Canadians with loved ones in Gaza to apply to bring them here. One Calgary man is trying to save his sister and her 4 young children, but he tells Heather Urich West Canada's visa process has stalled.
Born in terrible conditions inside a Rafah tent, Tamar Jarada's 1-month-old nephew is fighting to survive.
Adam now is in the hospital because of infections.
Welcome to Uridu. The number you are calling is currently unreachable. It's the message Jarada hears most days when he tries to call Gaza. The last time he spoke with his sister, it was a harrowing call.
As always, she was crying, begging for help, and I was hearing the bombs around her tent in Rafah. And her kids being scared.
The family has already been devastated by loss. Last October, an airstrike killed 17 family members, including Jarada's mom, dad, and 2 sisters. It's why the Calgary cancer researcher is now desperate to get his surviving sister and her family, along with his in-laws, to Canada. 16 of 18 family members have received initial approval for special temporary visas, and yet, in Rafah, they remain. According to Ottawa, there have been 986 applications for visas from Gaza, but among those who passed preliminary eligibility, only 14 have left the region to complete the necessary biometric step in Egypt, and each one did so on their own.
We obviously would prefer a more reliable way of getting a lot more people out, but I'm not going to blame people for shaking their lives in their hands and taking extraordinary measures to save their own people.
It's why Jarada is now looking to Egyptian operatives for help and turning online to crowdfunding to try and raise the staggering $160,000 required.
My biggest fear right now is that I won't be able to talk to my sister tomorrow.
For a grieving and terrified family desperate to bring their loved ones to safety, this, it seems, is the only option they have left. Heather Urich West, Global News, Calgary.
There's more fallout tonight from the passing of a watered-down NDP motion on Palestinian statehood in the House of Commons Monday. Liberal MP Anthony Housefather, one of 3 Liberals who voted against the motion, says he's considering his future in the party.
I started reflecting as to whether or not I belonged. And I will let you know further how I feel over the coming days. For the moment, I'm still there.
The motion passed, but not until after the Liberals drastically altered its wording to say the government will work towards recognizing a Palestinian state as part of a two-state solution. House Father says there was not enough recognition of what he calls the existential threat Israel faces and the fears of Jewish Canadians. We've long prided ourselves on pristine air quality in Canada, but that is an outdated notion. A new report shows for the first time on record, Canada's air quality was worse than the U.S. in 2023. In its 6th annual World Air Quality Report, Swiss-based IQ Air named Canada the most polluted country in North America. And of the 15 most polluted cities in Canada and the U.S., 14 were in Canada. Most of them in the West. That's where wildfires burned the largest swaths of land. As Neetu Garcha reports, people in BC are already being warned to prepare for what could be another fiery and hot year.
With the sun shining bright on the cusp of spring, the season's promise of renewal is overshadowed by fears of drought and scorching heat, setting the stage for what could be another devastating wildfire season.
This is the earliest that we have begun press conferences cautioning British Columbians about the summer season.
With last year's wildfire season the most destructive on record, she's encouraging British Columbians to have an emergency plan in place.
Register for emergency support services but online now before the emergency actually happens so that you're ready to go and able to receive support if you need it.
Evacuation is something winery owner John Skinner has had to deal with.
It's a constant threat.
After a weekend of record-breaking temperatures in BC, Skinner is sharing his fears about the 2024 season.
In 2020, we had a very substantial fire right to the back of our property, and it's frightening because we've got such a small snowpack now.
The average provincial snowpack for March 1st was 66% of normal.
The concerns are echoed by fire officials in the province's Okanagan Valley, where crews responded to 2 new wildfires over the weekend.
As you can see here, the snow all around us, but on the south-facing slope, it's really dry. It is drier than what it looks.
Targeted, temporary water restrictions may be needed again, but they are a last resort.
The province also announced an expansion of its use of enhanced technology to predict wildfire behavior, including infrared scanning, 5G technology, and drones.
We are the first and only standalone emergency management ministry in Canada for a province. This isn't about being scared, it's about being prepared.
Above normal temperatures across BC are expected in the coming months, and forecasters say the chance the province will see enough spring rainfall to alleviate drought conditions is possible, but unlikely. Neetu Garcha, Global News, Vancouver.
Critics of a new national security law in Hong Kong call it Hong Kong's giant leap backward. Known as Article 23, it passed unanimously by the territory's pro-Beijing parliament, eliminating freedoms that distinguish Hong Kong from China. It establishes new offenses like external interference and insurrection. Human Rights Watch says even possessing a book critical of the Chinese government can violate national security and mean years in prison. Attempts to impose similar laws in the past were met with huge pro-democracy protests. Leaders of those protests have mostly been jailed or gone into exile. A question of identity coming up, why the Innu Nation is taking the federal government to court. Canada's Auditor General is frustrated, saying little has changed in the living conditions on First Nations in this country.
After 4 audit reports, I can honestly say that I am completely discouraged that so little has changed. Our audits of federal programs to support Canada's Indigenous peoples reveal a distressing and persistent pattern of failure.
Whether in housing, policing, or safe drinking water, she says there's been little progress. Karen Hogan says the number of First Nations homes needing to be repaired or refurbished was the same in 2022 as it was in 2015. The report found funding for policing and safer communities has significantly increased since 2014, but she says $13 million in the last fiscal year went unspent. Inuit and Innu organizations joined forces today in Ottawa, calling on the federal government to scrap a controversial agreement that gives 6,000 people in South and Central Labrador Indigenous rights. Critics argue the group is not entitled to those rights. As Abigail Beeman reports, they call them settlers who are fraudulently claiming to be Inuit.
From Shahaji, Natwashish, and Nunutsiavut in Labrador, all the way to Ottawa, more than 50 Innu wanted to be at a federal court case in person with the question of identity at the core.
This is about settlers pretending to be Inuit.
The Innu Nation is taking the federal government to court, wanting a 2019 agreement signed with the Nunatukavut Community Council thrown out, arguing they aren't really Inuit.
I know who I am, and I know who our people are.
We know who we are. We know where we come from.
Former Liberal MP Todd Russell heads up the Nunatukavut Community Council. More than 6,000 people claim a large area of traditional territory in Labrador that overlaps with both Innu and Inuit land. They used to call themselves the Labrador Métis Association. Russell says he's confident in their case.
We have, for the last 30 years, been presenting evidence, reports, genealogy, archaeology, anthropology, sociology.
A number of groups are backing the Innu Nation, concerned about the impact if the government recognizes the Nunatukavut as Indigenous.
We are forced to fight fraudulent groups that Canada has empowered, and this was never part of the deal.
The right to self-identify as an Indigenous person should not be used as a tool to harm the rights and interests of First Nations by taking away rights and resources intended for the original stewards of these lands.
Russell says his people need housing and food security help and wants the government to come to the table.
We have many of our communities that are hanging by their fingernails. This is why we say to the federal government, ignore the BS, ignore all of these false allegations.
The federal court hearing continues Wednesday. Abigail Beeman, Global News, Ottawa.
Surprise shutdown ahead why Manitoba could face a fuel shortage. Winnipeggers are wondering if their fuel supply could soon run out. Imperial Oil shut down a pipeline on March 15th because of what the company calls integrity concerns. It supplies Winnipeg with gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel and will be out of service for 3 months. As Marnie Blunt reports, there doesn't appear to be a clear-cut solution.
It's an abrupt halt to the flow of fuel to Winnipeg. A major Manitoba pipeline now shut down for 3 months.
Almost everything in terms of gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel is brought in by these pipelines.
Crews will be replacing a section of the pipe that runs underneath the Red River, south of Winnipeg, near the small rural community of St. Adolphe. Imperial Oil says no materials were spilled, but now the city is left with about a week's worth of supply.
I realize anything, a discussion around gas can cause people to get anxious, and we just simply don't have any reason to think anybody should. We're going to just kind of make our way through this.
Solutions include moving fuel by truck and train, but supply chain experts say those are all things that take time and money.
There's no way that they're going to be able to make it as sort of life as normal. There just simply isn't enough capacity, loading, unloading facilities, even available trucks and rail cars to be able to move everything that we're moving now.
so there will be some reduction in supply.
The disruption will likely be reflected in prices at the pumps as well. Manitobans are being asked to moderate their gas consumption to avoid making a bad situation worse. Marty Blunt, Global News, Winnipeg.
You've probably seen the latest video of Princess Kate. It's everywhere. She was spotted with her husband buying some groceries. No big deal, except because she hasn't been seen in public for a few months, it's creating quite a stir. And as Crystal Gamansing reports, it's doing little to silence the roar of conspiracy theories.
Both TMZ and the Sun newspaper have published what are believed to be the first images of the Prince and Princess of Wales in public since her abdominal surgery in January.
Even that photo in the paper, they've got nothing else to write about.
The royals, especially the next generation, sells papers, increase views, and people tend to take it all in. The woman who mused about the paper not having anything better to cover also said this.
Yeah, it's nice to see her. I'm glad she's in good health.
The Princess of Wales has been out of the public eye recovering, making the images of the future king and queen at the farm shop in Windsor near their home even more desirable. An official photo released of her and the couple's 3 children last week sparked controversy. International newswire agencies determined it had been edited, violating photo policies. Kate issued an apology, but memes and conspiracy theories flooded the internet about her health, her whereabouts, even her marriage. The palace originally said the 42-year-old would not return to public duties until after Easter.
This is now just such a huge thing. I don't see how they can wait that long, which will be nearly 4 months out of the public eye.
When royals aren't seen, the stories don't stop. They can, however, become more absurd. Russian state media channels recently falsely claimed the king had died. Multiple British embassies, including Ukraine's, issued statements saying the report was fake. Being part of the royal family comes with clear perks, but privacy isn't one of them. Crystal Gamansing, Global News, London.
And that's Global National for this Tuesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is Jasper, Alberta. We'd love to see Your Canada. Please email it to viewers@globalnational.com. And thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Joining us now is South Carolina Senator Tim Scott. Senator, let's get your reaction to all these developments today. You know, the system is so obviously fair. There's no victims here. Okay, they had a disclaimer in every contract. Not one person that they did business with complained. Everyone was paid back with interest on time. Then the worst valuation of all came from the judge himself, and he was steadfast. Right now, you can go online and find a 2-acre property, oceanfront property in Palm Beach, just an empty lot, 2 acres, $200 million. You're going to tell me that 22 acres is $18 million? By the way, I'll find the money tomorrow. I don't know how, but I'll find the money. I'll buy that property. I'll pay twice that amount.
22 acres in Palm Beach is worth $1 billion without the buildings, without the name, without identifying the actual value of the property. All you need to know is if the liberal elite will weaponize the United States justice system against a former president, every single one of your millions and millions of viewers need to know we could be next. This is egregious. This is disgusting. But this is the plot and the plan of the radical left. Hear me clearly. President Donald Trump represents the working class of America. He represents the victim who understands clearly the only thing standing between the liberal elite and the everyday American is former President Donald Trump. That's why we have to all lean in on this election and make sure that the results are indisputable, clear, crystal clear. We must elect Donald Trump. Not only were we better off with Donald Trump, but if you want to eliminate chaos and return to law and order, which means that Lady Justice wears a blindfold, you must vote for Donald Trump. If you want to make sure that kids in the poorest neighborhoods in this country are afforded a great education and not the teachers' unions making decisions for adults and not kids, you must vote for Donald Trump. If you want to make sure that every single American has a chance to live their American dream, Donald Trump is our only choice. And finally, Sean, if you are disgusted by this, if you're disgusted by this 2-tier legal system, if you're disgusted by the actions in New York or this attorney general, you must have your voice heard loud and clear. And that happens on election day. They are absolutely petrified that Donald Trump is bringing a coalition of working Americans.
They're going to lie about issues like bloodbath, even though they've used the words, and there's been more violent rhetoric about Donald Trump coming out of their mouths, and we played a lot of that last night. They're going to they have said they will lie about abortion. Republicans better be prepared for these arguments. They will say democracy is in peril, the very people that unilaterally would allow elected officials to make a decision to kick somebody off the ballot. Talk about democracy in peril. Yes. They will demagogue. They will call Republicans racist. Ironically, coming from the guy that was partners with a former Klansman to stop integration of schools and public busing. Didn't want those schools to become racial jungles. So that is their technique. They can't run on "Are you better off?" How do Republicans fight back? This is the predictable attack. This is what we're going to hear for the next 230 days. Your advice to the Republicans?
1,000%. Hey, we have to be seen and heard. Go where you're not invited. Make sure that we campaign in every single community in this country. President Donald Trump has a 50-state strategy. We need to make sure that every Republican, every patriot, every parent who believes that they should have a voice in the education of their kids, we must stand with President Donald Trump. By doing so, our neighbors, our friends, our relatives will join this movement. We need momentum. We have the right candidate. This is our time to stand up for what America is today, not this utopian American dream that is our nightmare. They want socialism. We believe in free markets. We must fight for the America that we have today and make sure that our kids benefit from it. So get in the race, get in the fight, and let's win this, because this is not about Donald Trump. This is about your kids and your grandkids. We win, they lose. Let's make it happen.
Let's make it happen. I don't think we can survive. Elon Musk said, I don't think we survive 4 more years of this. All right, Senator, thank you. Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to
This is a show me your papers law.
Breaking news, Texas can now arrest and detain anyone suspected of illegally crossing into the state from Mexico. The fight over who can police the border escalating, and the Supreme Court weighing in.
Nearly 500,000 people here in El Paso have basically justified their presence in the United States because of the color of their skin.
What this means for the battle over immigration.
Texas, very simply, is enforcing the laws.
The CBS Evening News starts now. Good evening, I'm Nora O'Donnell, and thank you for being with us. We want to begin tonight with a ruling from the Supreme Court that allows a sweeping Texas immigration law to go into effect for now. In a 6-3 decision, the nation's highest court said it won't block the law, known as SB 4, that gives local and state police the power to arrest and detain migrants suspected of crossing the border illegally. The federal government has been the sole authority of immigration enforcement for decades, and critics say this ruling is an affront to federal law. The case now heads back to the Court of Appeals to decide if it is constitutional or not. In the meantime, it's a major victory for Texas and Republican Governor Greg Abbott. The White House said that they fundamentally disagree with the Supreme Court's order, and CBS's Ed O'Keefe is on the campaign trail with the president, and he'll start us off tonight from Las Vegas.
Razor wire and Texas National Guard troops along the U.S.-Mexico border reinforced tonight by the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, Lone Star State Sheriff and police departments can arrest, jail, and judges can prosecute migrants accused of illegally entering the U.S.
He's not denying illegal entry. President Biden is aiding and abetting illegal entry.
Texas Governor Greg Abbott, who's been locked in a years-long fight with the federal government over border security, last year signed what's known as the SB 4 law, amid the historic increase in migrant border crossings. Today, he called the Supreme Court's ruling a positive development. The White House sought to block the law, and today said it's another example of Republican officials politicizing the border while blocking real solutions. It called on Congress to pass a bipartisan border security plan currently being blocked in the House. The Supreme Court allowed the new law to take effect, but it still faces a challenge in a lower federal court. Today, conservative justices Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett urged the appeals court to rule quickly. Liberal justices Sonia Sotomayor and Ketanji Brown Jackson questioned the law's constitutionality and said it'll upend the long-standing federal-state balance of power and sow chaos. Multiple law enforcement officials tell CBS News they're already short-staffed and don't have the training from the state on how to enforce the law.
It's not like, oh, he looks illegal and we're going to put him in jail. We can't do that. We can't stereotype someone, someone from Mexico and do that.
And that potential for racial profiling across Texas is what concerns migrant activists like Dylan Corbett.
It's not just against recently arriving migrants. Migrants who are coming to the border today, but this really goes after Texans throughout the state.
Tonight, the Mexican government says it won't accept migrants that Texas officials try to send back under the new law. Campaigning here in Nevada, President Biden had no comment on the ruling. Coincidentally, he's headed next to the border states of Arizona and Texas. Nora?
Ed O'Keefe, thank you very much. Today, former Trump White House advisor Peter Navarro became the first person from the Trump administration to go to prison over matters related to the January 6th attack on the Capitol. CBS's Robert Costa reports Navarro was convicted of contempt of Congress and remained defiant to the very end.
Navarro's going to prison today.
Peter Navarro made it clear he understood his fate this morning. And addressing reporters outside Miami's Federal Correctional Institution, the 74-year-old former Trump trade advisor said he wasn't happy about it.
I'm pissed. That's what I'm feeling right now, but I'm also afraid of only one thing. I'm afraid for this country, because what they're doing, should have a chilling effect on every American, regardless of their party. If they come for me, they can come for you.
Navarro will live in an 80-person dormitory reserved for older inmates. He'll have access to a phone, email, and TV.
The president's going to sign another order.
Once a combative fixture at Trump's side, Navarro now becomes the first ever former White House official jailed for contempt of Congress. The 4-month sentence handed down after he defied a subpoena from the House January 6 committee, probing his role in trying to overturn the 2020 election.
The election's over, the vote is over, the outcome is not.
Navarro was an advocate of a proposed scheme to help Trump stay in power. The former president, who continues to falsely claim the election was stolen and praises those who face prosecution for their conduct on January 6, said Navarro was wrong.
I think it's a shame. I think it's a disgrace.
Behind the scenes, Republican sources tell me Trump now faces intense stress, politically and financially. His prized properties like Trump Tower and 40 Wall Street could be seized on Monday by the New York Attorney General if he doesn't secure his $454 million bond.
Robert Costa, thank you. Well, tonight, 2 former Mississippi sheriff's deputies are behind bars after being sentenced for taking part in the racially motivated torture of 2 black men last year. The deputies were among a group of white law enforcement officers who called themselves the Goon Squad because of their willingness to use excessive force. CBS's Errol Burnett reports.
Egregious and despicable. Those words from a federal judge in Mississippi describing the actions of former cops Hunter Elwood, sentenced to 20 years, and Jeffrey Middleton, sentenced to more than 17 years. They, along with 4 others, some of whom refer to themselves as the Goon Squad, pleaded guilty to breaking into this home early last year without a warrant, then terrorizing and torturing 2 black men. All apparently because they stayed at this house with a white woman.
The 6 white police officers involved in this assault sought to dehumanize their victims.
During the ordeal, both were handcuffed as deputies poured milk, alcohol, and syrup on their faces, calling them racial slurs. At one point, Michael Jenkins was shot in the mouth.
Look at him. Just there for a minute.
You see the bullet, coming out of the gun. I mean, the fire coming out, and it was horrific.
The federal charges were brought by the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division.
Hard to imagine a more atrocious set of civil rights violations than those carried out by these guys.
An investigation by the Associated Press revealed that since 2019, some of these deputies had been involved in at least 4 violent assaults on black men. They resulted in 2 deaths and another suffering lasting injuries.
They're not just depriving victims of their civil rights, they're degrading the public's trust in our criminal justice system.
Now, there are still 4 additional deputies to be sentenced later this week. And during today's hearing in the federal courthouse you see behind me, Hunter Elwood addressed the court, said he accepted responsibility, and said to the 2 victims, Nora, that he apologized. At that point, one of the victims, Eddie Parker, turned to him and said, "I forgive you."
Oh my goodness, wow. Errol Burnett, thank you.
Now to Haiti, where the U.S. is considering a new plan to airlift desperate Americans out of the country, which is in deep political turmoil. With the main airport in Haiti's capital still closed, helicopters may be used to fly Americans to the Dominican Republic, where they could book flights to the U.S. As CBS's Manuel Bojorquez reports, the only option for now is a dangerous 6-hour drive to another airport in Haiti's north.
Another day at Cap-Haïtien International Airport as Americans are desperate to flee a country in crisis. 82-year-old Gregoire Lecomte is one of hundreds of U.S. passport holders trying to leave. He's hoping to get home to his wife in New York, but still no luck securing a seat.
You're back here waiting to see when the next one will go, but no idea right now when it might happen.
No idea. This woman, who did not want her identity revealed, came to the airport early this morning with no baggage in hand, scared for those she leaves behind.
The thing is, people go inside your house, killing, raping, all those things, burning your house. You don't know tomorrow what's going to happen.
CBS Miami reporter Tanya Francois was also in Cap-Haïtien, where she was on board one of the several missionary flights bringing aid and evacuating people.
Airport workers tell me that this is the first flight to come in from the United States with passengers, also with supplies.
Residents in the capital of Port-au-Prince see no end to a crisis that has their city plagued by gang violence. More than 86,000 people are displaced, with no access to food or gas. People on the streets are on the brink of starvation. Widespread power outages are leaving some stranded and still hoping for a way out. Manuel Bojorquez, CBS News, Cap-Haïtien, Haiti.
Now to an alarming new study that estimates in Chicago that nearly 70% of children under 6 years old are exposed to lead-contaminated drinking water. CBS's Charlie DeMar reports on the latest major city to face this widespread problem.
Tonight, danger lurking in Chicago's drinking water, according to a new study that used AI to estimate lead levels in unfiltered tap water over a 7-year period. Benjamin Wynn is the study's lead researcher.
The goal is to have zero lead in water at all. And we know from the science that even small amounts of lead in the water can have an impact on your child.
Black and Hispanic children are more likely to be affected and less likely to have their household water tested, according to the study estimation.
I don't think we need to be alarmist. It's not as bad as the Flint crisis. Your kid's not going to be hospitalized from the levels of lead that we're seeing, but even these low levels of lead, these are things that can affect your child without you noticing.
Lead in drinking water is a nationwide issue. Children in Flint, Michigan were found to have learning delays after the lead water crisis began there 10 years ago. Today, Chicago's Department of Water Management told CBS News it has an issue with the study's methodology, saying its results only indicated whether there is a lead service line, not routine exposure. Chicago environmental advocate Shakina Perry is calling on the city to immediately replace lead water pipes.
So not only is this a public health crisis, but it's also an environmental justice issue. And so when you look at it through that lens, that should create a sense of urgency to say that we can't wait any longer.
The Biden administration has vowed to remove all lead pipes nationwide. Here in Chicago, the Department of Water Management says it's already introduced programs to remove the city's 400,000 lead service lines and offers residents with free water testing. Nora?
Charlie DeMar, thank you. The number of abortions in the U.S. topped 1 million last year for the first time in over a decade. More than 60% were medication abortions using a 2-pill regimen to terminate early pregnancies. The increase is despite the 2022 Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe v. Wade that allowed 13 states to ban abortion with few exceptions, forcing many women to travel out of state. The Supreme Court is set to hear arguments next week in a case that puts access to one of those medications used in abortions at stake. A mother, desperate to see her missing son again, called in a famous group of rescuers to help find him. We've got the details next. The search for a missing college student in Nashville is expanding. Riley Strain's family said today they'd asked the volunteer rescue group, the United Cajun Navy, to help look for the 22-year-old. Officials have been searching the Cumberland River and Strain's bank card because that was found near the shore on Sunday. The University of Missouri senior disappeared 11 days ago during a fraternity trip. His anguished mother says she usually speaks with her son a few times a day.
He's my best friend. He's everything.
Tennessee officials are investigating whether Strain was overserved alcohol at a bar owned by country music singer Luke Bryan. A new report on climate change issues a red alert warning to the world due to rising sea levels and record temperatures. We'll show you one ambitious plan to fight the problem next. 2023 was the hottest year on record, and a new report on climate change includes a dire warning for the planet. Rising temperatures have resulted in record low sea ice in the Antarctic, while sea levels are rising twice as fast as they were 2 decades ago. And if the world continues on the same path, ocean levels could rise in America as much as 7 feet by the year 2100. That's leading top climate scientists to combat the problem. The Biden administration is committing billions toward jumpstarting a new carbon capture industry in America. CBS's Ben Tracy shows us 2 unique approaches to tackling the crisis.
So this is where carbon goes to die?
Exactly.
This field in central Arkansas will soon be a graveyard for planet-warming pollution.
It's going into the ground and it'll stay here forever.
Barclay Rogers is CEO of Graphite, a startup that takes leftover material from timber and rice mills and locks away the carbon dioxide that plants naturally remove from the atmosphere by turning it into bricks, wrapping them up, and burying them in the ground.
We're taking the carbon captured by plants and keeping it out of the atmosphere for 1,000 years or more.
So you got a lot of space here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Graphite plans to turn this empty warehouse into the world's largest carbon removal facility, eventually removing 50,000 tons of CO2 per year. That's like taking 10,000 cars off the road. American Airlines is paying Graphite to offset some of the pollution from its flights.
This brick of dead plants and trees is really going to be a solution?
It's going to be a very big solution.
To avoid the worst impacts of climate change, scientists say we need to stop burning fossil fuels and switch to cleaner forms of energy, but also need to remove billions of tons of carbon dioxide we've already put up into the atmosphere.
This is not a nice to have anymore, this is a must have.
Shashank Samala runs Heirloom Carbon. It just opened the nation's first commercial carbon capture plant in central California. The automated facility stacks trays of limestone 40 feet high, allowing the rock to suck carbon dioxide from the air like a sponge. In nature, that takes months. Heirloom's technology does it in just days.
Carbon that might have come out of somebody's tailpipe is now being sucked down into this.
Yeah, exactly.
Heirloom says its pilot plant removes just 1,000 tons of CO2 per year, but plans to build facilities that capture 1,000 times more. Carbon removal is often knocked for being too expensive, but given the climate crisis we now face, Samala says it's an essential part of the solution.
You need to start turning back the clock on climate change. What carbon removal offers us is the closest thing to a time machine.
Ben Tracy, CBS News, Central California.
Heart of America is next with a remarkable graduation ceremony for a premature baby born at just 26 weeks.
If you can't watch the CBS Evening News, you can listen. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Finally, tonight's Heart of America, meet Eliana Lopez. When Eliana was born in May of 2023, she was the smallest premature baby ever at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles, weighing only 12 ounces, and she was the size of a soda can. After spending 10 months in the NICU with a devoted staff of over 200 doctors and nurses taking care of her, she was finally able to go home last week. The staff at Cedars-Sinai Garin Children's gave her a full graduation ceremony, complete with a cap and gown. Eliana's parents, Cecilia and Boris, said the staff became like family.
We knew that this day would come. We were very hopeful and we had faith that things would work out, and we trusted this hospital and we knew we were in good hands. Today we get to take our daughter home after 10 months.
Well, Eliana is now 17 pounds, but she's still got a long road ahead. Eliana Lopez and the incredible staff at Cedars-Sinai Garin Children's, tonight's Heart of America. And that is tonight's CBS Evening News. I'm Nora O'Donnell. Good night.
Tonight, breaking news, the Supreme Court says Texas can enforce its own immigration law, arresting and in some cases deporting suspected undocumented migrants for now. Also tonight, the chilling bank robbery, the suspects 11, 12, and 16. And another royal image tonight that appears altered too, this one with the Queen. First, the Supreme Court ruling allowing Texas to enforce its own new immigration law for now. The law allowing police to arrest migrants suspected of illegally crossing into the U.S. and it allows Texas judges to remove them from the U.S. regardless of federal law. Terry Moran at the Supreme Court. Tonight, after a horrific racial attack, 2 former deputies sentenced, part of a group of white officers accused of torturing 2 black men, shooting one of them and beating them. Tonight, one of those officers getting 20 years in prison. And what the judge said today while handing down the sentence, the race for president, and tonight, Donald Trump saying Jewish Americans who vote for Democrats, quote, hate their religion and should be ashamed of themselves. The White House responding tonight and Trump doubling down on his comments. Rachel Scott reporting. One of Donald Trump's former aides, Peter Navarro, sent to prison today despite trying to appeal it all the way to the Supreme Court. 24 hours after President Biden urged Benjamin Netanyahu against the offensive in southern Gaza into Rafah. But Netanyahu is now saying tonight back up in Israel. The crisis in Haiti, our team is there. The U.S. State Department warning Americans in Haiti to be ready for possible chopper evacuations, to be ready to get to the U.S. Embassy if needed. Our Matt Rivers tonight showing us the scene, though, at the U.S. Embassy. Back in the U.S. tonight, that alarming bank robbery, the FBI arresting 3 suspects, just 11, 12, and 16. The new royal image tonight making news already, now a second one reportedly altered, this one with the Queen. What's been spotted, and what's going on here? Amid questions about Princess Catherine and that new video showing her out with Prince William. And longtime ESPN anchor Hannah Storm with our Robin Roberts tonight, revealing her battle with breast cancer, how she learned, no family history, what doctors discovered, and her message tonight, 3 daughters of her own.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight with David Muir.
Good evening, and it's great to have you with us here on a Tuesday night. We begin tonight with this new ruling from the Supreme Court allowing Texas to take action on its own when it comes to illegal immigration, allowing Texas to arrest people suspected of crossing into the U.S. illegally, and in some cases allowing Texas to deport them. It comes after a major clash between the Biden administration and Texas Governor Greg Abbott. Late today, the Supreme Court, in a 6-3 ruling, the 6 conservative-leaning justices ruling in favor of the Texas governor, the court lifting the stay, the hold on that state's controversial new immigration law for now. The Biden administration calling the law unconstitutional and a clear violation of federal authority. So what does this mean? The immediate change on the ground in Texas. ABC's Terry Moran, who has covered the Supreme Court for years, leading us off from the court tonight.
Tonight, authorities in Texas can now, on their own, arrest people who they suspect are migrants here illegally, regardless of federal law, and even send them to Mexico. The Supreme Court's conservative majority granting Texas that green light for now to enforce its controversial immigration law. In a 6-3 order, the High Court rejected a request by the Biden administration to intervene and place the law, SB 4 as it's called, on hold while it is challenged in the lower courts. The Biden administration argues the Texas law is an infringement on the federal government's exclusive authority over immigration law, a power grounded in the Constitution and affirmed by the Supreme Court. Tonight, Texas Governor Greg Abbott called the court's order a, quote, clearly positive development. But in a concurring opinion, conservative justices Amy Coney Barrett and Brett Kavanaugh made clear that this is not the last word. They want the lower appeals court to render its judgment first on SB 4, and then the Supreme Court can review that. But in a scathing dissent joined by Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, Justice Sonia Sotomayor warned that the court's order invites further chaos and crisis in immigration enforcement. Sotomayor adding, this law will disrupt sensitive foreign relations, frustrate the protection of individuals fleeing persecution, and deter non-citizens from reporting abuse or trafficking. The ruling comes as federal migrant apprehensions across the southwest border reached an average of 4,200 daily, a sharp decline from the peak of nearly 11,000 in a single day back in December. So now this case goes back to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit with a nudge from some of the justices to move quickly, and that could mean this Texas law could be back before the Supreme Court soon, perhaps within days. Still, the White House tonight is saying that the court's order today will, quote, sow chaos and confusion at the border. David?
But not over yet, as you point out. Terry Moran leading us off tonight. Terry, thank you. We turn now to that chilling case that made national headlines, a horrific racial attack in Mississippi. Tonight, 2 former deputies sentenced, part of a group of white officers accused of torturing 2 black men, shooting one of them and beating them. Tonight, one of those officers getting 20 years in prison today, the judge calling the crimes, quote, egregious and despicable. Here's ABC's Faith Abube.
Tonight, two former Mississippi Sheriff's deputies sentenced for their role in the brutal and racially motivated murder of two black men. Deputy Hunter Elward getting 20 years. Lieutenant Jeffrey Middleton sentenced to 17.5 years. They're two of 6 officers who have pleaded guilty to federal felony charges. According to court documents, the officer is part of a group nicknamed the Goon Squad because of their willingness to use excessive force and not report it.
This Goon Squad has been operating without supervision.
In January of last year, the Goon Squad bursting into this home without a warrant after a white neighbor reported several black males for suspicious behavior. Michael Jenkins and Eddie Parker placed under arrest in their own home without any evidence of a crime. Prosecutors say the officers then repeatedly tased the two men, calling them racial slurs, beating them, and even sexually assaulting them over the course of 90 minutes. Deputy Elward shooting Jenkins in the mouth, execution style, nearly killing him. And as he lay there bleeding, investigators say the 6 officers conspired to cover up their actions, even planting drugs and a gun.
Can you imagine the abject terror those two victims must have felt?
Today, Elward apologizing to the victims. Eddie Parker saying he still suffers.
What's done already, man, can't be erased, man, can't be taken back. I relay this every day.
And David, the rest of the officers will be sentenced tomorrow and on Thursday. All 6 are facing additional sentencing on state charges at a later date. David.
Faith Abube reporting tonight. Faith, thank you. We turn now to the race for the White House, and tonight Donald Trump saying Jewish Americans who vote for Democrats, quote, hate their religion and should be ashamed of themselves. The White House responding tonight and Trump doubling down on what he said. Here's Rachel Scott.
Tonight, Donald Trump under fire from some of the nation's top Jewish leaders after saying that any Jewish person who votes for Democrats hates their religion.
Any Jewish person that votes for Democrats hates their religion, they hate everything about Israel, and they should be ashamed of themselves because Israel will be destroyed.
Today, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, the nation's top Jewish elected official, denouncing Trump's comments as reprehensible and dangerous.
To say you hate Israel or your religion because you have one political view over the other is sick, it's hateful. It is unadulterated anti-Semitism.
Second gentleman Doug Emhoff, who was also Jewish, outraged.
This is a disgusting, toxic, anti-Semitic thing to say by anyone, let alone a former president of the United States.
The Anti-Defamation League calling Trump's comments defamatory and patently false, and a White House spokesperson saying there is no justification for spreading toxic, false stereotypes that threaten fellow citizens. None. Late today, Trump doubling down.
I think that the Democrats have been very, very opposed to Jewish people.
President Biden himself today traveling to Nevada to court another key group of voters, Latinos. Biden making sure Latino voters are well aware of Trump's comments attacking migrants for, quote, poisoning the blood of America.
It is a very sad thing for our country. It's poisoning the blood of our country.
The president firing back in an interview with Univision.
He says immigrants are poisoning the blood of this country. This guy despises Latinos.
President Biden visiting both Nevada and Arizona today. He relied heavily on the Latino vote to win those states back in 2020, but polls have shown that his support among that critical group is slipping. The Biden campaign launching a national program to try to mobilize Latino voters ahead of November. David.
Rachel Scott covering the race for president. Rachel, thank you. Meanwhile, tonight, one of Donald Trump's former aides, Peter Navarro, now in prison tonight, despite his appeal all the way to the Supreme Court. Here's Jonathan Carl.
Tonight, former White House advisor Peter Navarro became the first senior Trump administration official to go to prison.
You gotta stop meeting like this.
Convicted of contempt of Congress for refusing to cooperate with the January 6th committee.
This is the partisan weaponization of our judicial system.
He'll be spending up to 4 months in a low-security prison in Florida, where most of the inmates are elderly men convicted of white-collar crimes. They'll be required to do a job of some sort, likely low-level maintenance.
I think it's a shame. I think it's a disgrace. It's a disgrace to our nation what they did to him.
This comes as Trump is calling for the prosecution of his political enemies, including former Congresswoman Liz Cheney, who led the January 6th committee. He says Cheney, quote, should go to jail.
Please rise for the horribly and unfairly treated January 6th hostages.
And at Trump rallies, he stands to salute the national anthem sung by inmates in prison for what they did on January 6th. Trump calls those people who attacked the Capitol patriots, suggesting he'll pardon them on his first day in office.
Over the past couple of years, many Republican leaders have sought to minimize or even forget about what happened on January 6th, but not Donald Trump. As he embraces those who attacked the Capitol, he is increasingly putting January 6th at the center of his 2024 campaign. David?
John Carl again tonight. Thank you, John. On Capitol Hill today, 2 former top military commanders were grilled before House lawmakers over the deadly U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. 13 U.S. service members and 170 Afghan civilians were killed in a suicide bomb attack at the airport in Kabul. That was back in August of 2021. Former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, and retired General Kenneth McKenzie placed blame on the State Department for waiting too long to order evacuations. Milley acknowledging he doesn't know the exact number of Americans or Afghans who helped the U.S. trying to escape the Taliban, who were left behind. Tonight, 24 hours after that phone call between President Biden and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Biden warning Netanyahu against the offensive in southern Gaza into Rafah. What Netanyahu is now saying tonight. ABC's back up and from Israel.
Tonight, just hours after that phone call between President Biden and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, during which Biden warned Netanyahu a ground invasion in Rafah would be a mistake, the Israeli leader doubling down, telling lawmakers here in Israel there is no alternative. His defiant comments coming after that blunt warning from Biden, the two speaking for the first time in over a month. Yesterday, Netanyahu agreeing to hold off on a ground operation until consulting with U.S. officials in Washington about an alternative approach aimed at protecting civilians. Overnight, these aid trucks rolling into northern Gaza where the UN says famine may have already begun.
The Israeli government, and I met with a very senior person today, they insist there is no starvation in Gaza.
We are seeing vulnerable people suffering every single day. We're seeing a trickle of aid when we need a tsunami of food assistance.
David, Israel believes about 5 Hamas battalions plus Hamas's leader are holed up in Rafah, which is one reason a senior Israeli official tells me tonight there is no world in which Israel does not go ahead with this offensive, despite what the president says.
David, back up in Tel Aviv for us. Thank you, Matt. In Haiti tonight, the U.S. State Department is now warning Americans in that country to be ready for possible evacuations, to be ready to get to the U.S. Embassy. But our Matt Rivers on the ground there showing us what that journey might be like. The situation just outside the U.S. Embassy tonight.
Tonight, with Haiti spiraling deeper into chaos, the State Department sending a letter to Americans here in Haiti telling them to be ready for possible helicopter evacuations from the embassy in Port-au-Prince. But today, we saw firsthand just how dangerous even getting to that embassy can be.
That building right there is the U.S. Embassy in Port-au-Prince, and there has been gang fighting across this entire area. But if you come with me this way, you see that gas station just down the road there? That's how close the gangs have managed to get. The distance between that point and the embassy, no more than a quarter mile.
This chaos forcing thousands from their homes. This makeshift shelter here just a few weeks ago was a government building. We walk in and see them, families sleeping on the floor. Marie Lina Leon and her 11-year-old son, Fabien, desperate for food.
How difficult has this been for you and for your son?
It's very difficult to feed him, Marie Lina tells me. People here are dying one death, hunger.
David, Americans being told they'll be given just 1 day's notice prior to any potential flight out and that they'll have to make it to the embassy at their own risk. David?
Matt Rivers in Haiti for us again tonight. Matt, thank you. We turn now to London tonight where yet another royal image is making news. Another photo reportedly altered, this one with the Queen. What's been spotted in that image? And of course, the bigger question here, what's going on? ABC's Maggie Rulli in London tonight.
Tonight, Kensington Palace and the Princess of Wales under fire again, accused of doctoring family photos. Now, this photo, the palace says, was taken by the princess in 2022 under scrutiny, getting images suggesting it could be digitally enhanced.
It adds to the narrative that people feel that they can't be trusted and that they're concerned about what they can believe.
Getty reviewing images provided by the palace after Kate apologized for manipulating this photo, only adding to the speculation about her well-being. Though this footage, obtained by TMZ, appears to show Kate and her husband, Prince William, grocery shopping near their home in Windsor Saturday. Photography experts interviewed by ABC News pointing out clear signs of editing in this family portrait featuring the late Queen. Look at the Queen's skirt here. The pattern does not line up. Same with the couch. The stitching doesn't match. And these blurry outlines of Prince Louis's left ear and chin, suggesting his face could have been lifted from another photo. And then David, one photo expert, told us it's possible that photo is a composite. And now Getty's going back and reviewing all images provided to them by the palace. David.
All right, Maggie Rulli in London. This isn't going away. Maggie, thank you. When we come back here, the chilling bank robbery here in the U.S., the three suspects, just 11, 12, and 16. Also news tonight about intermittent fasting and your heart. And longtime ESPN anchor Hannah Storm, diagnosed with breast cancer, no family history, telling our Robin Roberts how it was found and her message tonight. Tonight, the FBI in Houston has arrested 3 bank robbery suspects, just 11, 12, and 16. Authorities say they robbed a Wells Fargo bank last week while brandishing a weapon. They went to the teller demanding money. One official saying they are the youngest robbery suspects he's ever seen. When we come back here tonight, the news on intermittent fasting and your heart, and ESPN's Hannah Storm and her breast cancer diagnosis tonight, what she told our Robin Roberts. To the index tonight, a new research finding intermittent fasting may pose risks to your heart, the practice where people eat within an 8-hour window or less. Researchers finding it poses a significant risk of dying from cardiovascular disease. The findings set to be presented at an American Heart Association conference. Experts say more study will be coming on this. Tonight, the lottery jackpot's growing. Mega Millions surging to $893 million now ahead of tonight's drawing. No Powerball winner last night. That jackpot now $687 million for tomorrow night. Good luck. When we come back here tonight, longtime ESPN anchor Hannah Storm with our Robin Roberts and her very personal reveal tonight. Funny tonight here, longtime ESPN anchor Hannah Storm, you know her from SportsCenter, sitting down with our Robin Roberts, revealing her breast cancer diagnosis and her message with 3 daughters of her own.
The doctor said, I'm so surprised, but you have ductal carcinoma in situ. You have DCIS, the earliest form of breast cancer. And I was like, DCIS? I've never heard of this in my life.
How did you handle that?
I was shocked because, again, I had mammograms every year. I have no risk factors. I have no breast cancer in my family. I did not have a lump. I did not have pain. I don't have any genetic predisposition to breast cancer. I got to say, I was shocked. I was scared.
And how are you today?
I'm good. Really good. Really, really good. I'm very, very, very lucky because they found it so early. What I had is a lumpectomy. The surgery was successful. I was able to go back to work, cover the Super Bowl. I'm also taking a drug called tamoxifen. I'm taking this for the next 3 years.
And now you decided to let women know the importance of getting those screenings.
The more that you talk about it, and I think just demystify it, and it's okay to talk about, it's okay to share, you know, whenever you're ready. And
you have 3 daughters.
And I have 3 daughters, and that makes it even more important, right? Because you want to think about your family. There they are.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think about having daughters and the importance of them understanding, advocating for their health, and what you can do. You can find out, and you need to find out. And don't be afraid to have a mammogram. Be afraid not to. Be afraid of what you don't know.
Yeah, not what you can find out.
Yeah.
Hannah, it is so wonderful to see you.
You're the best. Make your message, right? I mean, you've done it.
You're doing it. You're doing it.
Always pulling for Hannah. I'll see you tomorrow. Good night.
Thank you for making World News Tonight with David Muir, America's most watched newscast.
Thank you for watching and privilege of your time. This is Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Woodman. Have a good life.